Well, in case you missed it, last week, the presidents of three of the most prestigious Ivy League universities in the United States, of course, appeared before a US congressional committee to answer questions about the rise of violent anti-Semitism on campuses there. All three were asked a simple question. Is the calling for the genocide of Jews a violation of their code of conduct? All three said, that depends.
At MIT, does calling for the genocide of Jews violate MIT's code of conduct or rules regarding bullying and harassment? Yes or no?
If targeted at individuals, not making public statements.
Specifically calling for the genocide of Jews, does that constitute bullying or harassment?
It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman. If the speech becomes conduct, it can be harassment, yes.
Conduct meaning committing the act of genocide? Yes or no?
It can be, depending on the context.
Extraordinary stuff, wasn't it? Well, since then, Penn State President Liz Magill has stepped down. The other two are still clinging on for dear life. What this hearing has done, though, more broadly, has increased pressure on universities the world over to answer the same question. Joining me now to further unpack this is former UN official and emeritus professor at ANU's Crawford School of Public Policy, Ramesh Thakur. Ramesh, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Gemma, for having me.
It's a pleasure. Now, your column this week put words to what a lot of us, I think, are pondering in our minds and hearts, that tertiary education and the culture broadly there is part of this problem that needs addressing. What's your take?
Well, there was a series of problems with their responses. The question they were asked was, as you said, very simple. It required an element of moral clarity. Instead, they answered with obfuscation and legal ambiguity. And in the process, they demonstrated, firstly, a huge element of hypocrisy, because their free speech concerns have been notably absent over the past few years with regard to a series of other, quote-unquote, progressive ideological affairs, for example, misgendering and correct pronouns. But even more importantly, I think it showed up the moral hollowness. It's a simple moral answer that calling for genocide is evil and should be banned. And It has reflected a crisis of university governance, the takeover by the DEI core, and that in turn, I think, actually reflects a crisis of public morality across the West, when the Western societies seem to be under assault from within more than from external enemies.
It's a really prescient take, I think. And the obvious place, just to pick up on your last comments there, the obvious place to go with that congressional hearing is it wrong to call, for example, for the genocide of gays, Christians, Muslims, Americans, Italians, whatever? Of course it is. Of course it's morally wrong. And it shouldn't take anyone more than a split second to know that the answer is, of course it's wrong. And you've referenced this crisis of governance at university, but governance for most of us is a very, I guess, a clinical term. It speaks to process rather than these matters. How is it, can you just unpack that a bit further for us? How is it a crisis of governance?
There's two or three things that have happened. Firstly, I think the university administrators have grown in numbers and have assumed more and more powers over both academic faculty and also students. And the proportion of the budget going to them has increased steadily over the past few decades, if you like. Secondly, once that was done, the adherents of the woke agenda in turn took over the administration and then established their conformist views across the universities. And resulted in cancel culture, which was actually very succinctly expressed by Herbert Marcuse, who is a favorite person to read by these people. And that is, some things may not be said, some ideas may not be expressed, and some policies may not be proposed. And if you do any of this, you'll be hounded out, shouted down if you appear on campus, your offices will be raided, you might even be assaulted. Mm-hmm. And as a result, we have astonishing viewpoint uniformity rather than diversity. The student newspaper at Harvard which many regard as the world's most prestigious university, did a survey where it turned out that 77% of Harvard faculty described themselves as liberal and only 3% as conservative. Now, once you have that, you have proof of an intellectual, political, and even cultural conformity on campus. I think the university campuses should assure physical safety for all their people, but it's a place where you should be challenged intellectually and not provided with trigger warnings and safe spaces and therapy spaces because the people elected Donald Trump as president.
Absolutely, of course. Ramesh Thakur, we're going to have to leave it there. That issue, I am sure, is one that will not go away in a hurry. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon.